In March of 2020, a Texas woman was sentenced to life without parole for the brutal murder of her daughter. The incident took place on January the 5th of 2017 at Crystal Villanueva's home in Kyle, where she lived with her daughter and her daughter's father, Refugio Hernandez, as well as with the latter's parents. The woman's father-in-law, Eustorgio Ariano Uresti, was the first to call 911 after escaping a knife attack carried out without warning of provocation by Villanueva. The woman, who was in her mid-20s at the time, had reportedly approached Ariano Uresti from behind and stabbed him in the head and back. Ariano Uresti survived the attack and, in the immediate aftermath, fled the home and alerted the authorities. A SWAT team and crisis negotiators were called to the scene when it emerged that Villanueva's daughter, Giovanna, was still inside the home with her. A second 911 call then came from Villanueva herself, who admitted that she'd stabbed her father-in-law and also told the operator that she'd killed Giovanna because she asked for cereal. In the moments that followed, SWAT operators forced their way into the home. According to a subsequent report, Villanueva was found nude in the front room, apparently freshly showered. Giovanna's lifeless body was discovered in the bedroom, decapitated and with stab wounds. Villanueva was arrested for murder and assault. The woman, who tested positive for marijuana and alcohol in her system, appeared to be smiling or holding back laughter in her mugshot. During the trial that followed, Villanueva's legal team argued that she was not guilty by reason of insanity, citing her history of receiving mental health treatment. Her lawyer, Carlos Garcia, suggested she suffered from Capgras syndrome, also known as imposter syndrome, a delusional belief that her loved ones had been replaced by replicas and that she'd attacked them in an attempt to bring her real family back. The prosecution noted that no symptoms associated with the condition were reported prior to or after the violence, and that the mental health treatment Villanueva had received coincided with periods of substance abuse. A psychiatric expert called by the defense admitted on cross-examination that the use of marijuana in particular could have exacerbated existing mental conditions and interfered with the defendant's treatment. Villanueva was ultimately found guilty of capital murder, for which she received a life sentence, as well as of aggravated assault, resulting in a 20-year sentence. Number 6. London road rage incident. On May the 2nd of 2024, 2 men were recorded brawling in broad daylight during a road rage incident in Greater Rex Street in Whitechapel, East London. The pair, a helmet-clad biker and a driver, were initially engaged in a shoving match. The altercation escalated when the driver struck the other man with a steering wheel lock. The biker retaliated with a heavy punch that sent the driver's glasses flying off his head. Dazed from the blow, the man was then pushed headfirst into a bollard. Bystanders broke up the fight and the biker climbed on his motorcycle while the driver returned to his car, seemingly still recovering from the melee, as he first mistakenly went to the passenger side of the vehicle. The identities of those involved weren't revealed, and it wasn't clear if they faced any charges. The onlooker, who'd captured the incident from their window, shared the footage online, prompting several critical comments towards the futility of the driver's attack. One user wrote, "Totally pointless, fighting a bloke with a lid on." Number 5. Ryan Sweat. 26-year-old Boston woman Destiny DeKoff died on April the 7th of 2024, roughly 72 hours after she'd been mowed down by a vehicle near Milford, Massachusetts. The driver who'd struck her was 36-year-old Ryan Sweat, and the incident had reportedly begun as a road rage argument. As per Sweat's report, he'd been driving his Honda Civic on Route 85 when DeKoff's car slammed the brakes in front of him. Sweat reported that 4 men emerged from the vehicle and threatened him with a knife, prompting him to speed away. Witness testimonies and security footage from a nearby pub revealed that he made 2 U-turns before his Honda veered to the right and barreled towards DeKoff and her companions. Sweat struck the woman with the middle front end of his vehicle, sending her 50 to 75 feet down the road. The impact was so powerful that some of the young woman's clothes reportedly peeled off her body. She suffered a brain bleed, collapsed lungs, and fractures to her shoulder, tibia, and ribs. In spite of the efforts of medical staff, she never regained consciousness, and her family ultimately decided to pull her off life support. In the collision's immediate aftermath, Sweat stopped his car and cooperated with the police, telling an officer who'd caught up with him, "They're trying to kill me," while gesturing towards the group who'd gathered around Dikoff's blood-soaked body. Sweat initially pleaded not guilty to assault and battery with a dangerous weapon, causing serious bodily injury charges, which were upgraded to murder following Dikoff's passing. His lawyers argued that he'd fled in terror of the men threatening him and that he hadn't meant to strike Dikoff. However, the police pointed to the fact that he'd turned twice and headed towards the group instead of simply driving away as an indication of malicious intent. When Sweat appeared in Framingham District Court in late April of 2024, his family and Dikoff's traded insults in the hallway before a bloody video-recorded brawl erupted. Dikoff's aunt, Dawn Anderson, accused Sweat's girlfriend of attacking her first and inflicting a bleeding cut to her neck. The brawling groups were eventually separated by security, and it wasn't clear if anyone was charged in connection to the fighting. Number 4. Jesse Hernandez and Beth Roberts. On the morning of November the 12th of 2023, deputies from the Okaloosa County Sheriff's Office responded to a call in Fort Walton Beach. A woman reported that her boyfriend, Marquis Jackson, had refused to return her car and had been texting her threats. Deputies Javier Reyna, Dea Riley, and Jesse Hernandez, along with Sergeant Beth Roberts, went to the address, and around 10 minutes after their arrival, Jackson walked up to the scene. He was detained, and following a search, he was handcuffed and strapped into the back of Hernandez's vehicle. Reyna and Riley went to search for the missing vehicle, which they found about 3 miles away. As Roberts continued talking to the woman who'd placed the call, Hernandez approached the passenger side rear door of his SUV with the intention of performing a secondary search of Jackson. The suspect's girlfriend had told law enforcement that she was aware of him owning a silencer and more than one gun. As Hernandez got near the SUV, he heard a pop sound, which he believed was the sound of a gunshot coming from inside the cruiser. The ensuing chaos was captured on officers' body cams. Hernandez dropped to the ground, thinking he'd been hit, and repeatedly yelled out, "Shots fired!" while rolling around. He then brandished his weapon and shot into the back of his police vehicle, prompting Roberts to do the same. When asked by the sergeant if he was okay, Hernandez yelled out, "I'm hit!" as he lay on his side and emptied a clip into the cruiser. He then crawled on all fours behind a parked car until the arrival of backup. Jackson, who'd remained restrained inside the vehicle as the hail of bullets fell upon it, had never fired any weapon, and Hernandez hadn't been shot. The sound that had prompted the deputy to go from 0 to 100 was actually that of an acorn falling on his patrol car. Jackson, who wasn't hurt in the shooting, was taken to a medical center and then to jail. Speaking of the mental anguish he experienced in the incident's wake, Jackson reported, "I truly believe I'm damaged for life," noting, "I was scared to death and I knew all I could depend on was God. I ignored everything and prayed." An internal investigation exonerated Roberts as it concluded she'd acted appropriately given her colleagues' reaction. Hernandez, however, was found to have violated the policy regarding the excessive use of control to resistance. He resigned in December and was still under investigation as of the latest updates on the matter. Number 3. Luis, Franka, and Manuel de Oliveira. A dispute between two neighbors in the Brazilian city of Vitoria abruptly devolved into a shootout on April the 20th of 2024. 33-year-old lawyer Luis Franka confronted Manuel de Oliveira, aged 73, and his wife outside their residential complex. The argument was reportedly centered on the fact that the couple's pet Alaskan Malamute didn't have a leash and muzzle. De Oliveria's wife, Marilia Pepino, reported that she tried to defuse the situation but quoted an enraged Franka as saying, "No, let's see who dies first. Let's see who gets a mouthful of ants." De Oliveira returned to his home to retrieve a handgun, which he tucked in his waistband before going back out. A CCTV recorded exchange of gunfire erupted between the neighbors as Franka was walking his own dog. At least 30 shots were traded in what was described as a Wild West-style shootout. De Oliveira was struck and he walked for about a block before he collapsed. The 73-year-old was pronounced dead at the scene. Franka awaited the arrival of law enforcement and was arrested. As of the latest information available on the case, the authorities were working to determine who'd fired first. Pepino claimed that it was the lawyer who'd initially shot at her husband, while Franka maintained that he'd reacted in self-defense to De Oliveira firing first. Eugenio Ricas, the Secretary of State for Public Security of Espirito Santo, lamented the shooting in a video-recorded statement, saying, "All this because of arguments over dog walking. In other words, a banal crime, a banal death. And the result is that now 2 families are torn apart." Today's topic was requested by Horizon Era 2074. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. Dexter Reed. Days after appearing in court on firearm charges, 26-year-old Dexter Reed was stopped by Chicago law enforcement in East Garfield Park on March the 21st of 2024. The traffic stop was for an alleged seatbelt violation, but the situation escalated dramatically. An officer approached Reed's SUV and demanded that he roll down the window. Although he initially complied, Reed then started raising the window against the officer's commands. He also refused to unlock his car door as ordered by plainclothes police officers who had their pistols drawn. Within seconds, gunfire erupted. Multiple cops fired into the SUV, discharging 96 shots in 41 seconds. Moments later, Reed was seen on body cam footage lying face down in the street, unresponsive and with one shoe missing. A 911 caller reporting the shooting described that those involved were shooting like they're having a Vietnam War. Reed died after he was shot 13 times, including in the chest, buttocks, shoulder, knee, and thigh. The Cook County State's Attorney's Office and the Civilian Office of Police Accountability, or COPA, launched an investigation into the shooting. COPA found that Reed had shot first, wounding an officer standing on the passenger side of his vehicle and prompting the officers to return fire. Reed's handgun was found on the passenger seat of his SUV. Protests followed, and Reed's family filed a federal wrongful death suit. It alleged that the officers had increased the risk of death by sideswiping Reed's vehicle with an unmarked police car, then brandishing weapons while wearing civilian clothing, and escalating the situation by pointing their guns at Reed. They were accused of promoting brutally violent, militarized policing tactics and of continuing to fire on Reed even after he'd gotten out of the vehicle with his hands up. Information from late April of 2024 indicated that the officers involved had been placed on 30 days of administrative leave as the investigation into the circumstances surrounding the shooting progressed. If these cases didn't escalate quickly enough for you, then stay tuned after number 1 to see things go from bad to worse in 12 lunatics who attacked cops, if you haven't seen that one yet. Number 1. Joel Couchi. On a quiet April day in 2024, chaos ensued at the Westfield Bondi Junction shopping mall in Sydney, Australia, when a homeless man with a history of mental illness went on a stabbing spree. On the afternoon of April the 13th, 40-year-old Joel Couchi entered the complex with a 12-inch knife in hand and began attacking innocent shoppers. He was captured on CCTV running around the mall with the blade. while wearing shorts and a Kangaroos rugby jersey. Men, women, and children fled for their lives and barricaded themselves inside stores or left the mall via fire exits. As his rampage unfolded, Couchi fatally knifed 5 women and 1 man. The victims were identified as 28-year-old Ashley Good, who'd recently had a baby, 25-year-old bride-to-be Dawn Singleton, architect Jade Young, aged 47, security guard Faraz Tahir, aged 30, along with 55-year-old artist Pikria Darchia and 27-year-old economics student Yishuan Cheng. At least a dozen other shoppers suffered injuries. Couchi, who'd been diagnosed with schizophrenia in his teens, primarily targeted women. His father would later state that he believed it was out of frustration for not having a girlfriend of his own. Inspector Amy Scott had been checking liquor licenses at nearby hotels when the attack unfolded, and she, as her superiors later praised, heroically ran towards danger. She encountered Couchi on the complex's 5th floor. Scott held him at gunpoint and ordered him to drop the blade. The mass killer didn't comply and lunged towards her. Scott then opened fire and neutralized him. She radioed for help and performed CPR on an unresponsive Couchi as she awaited paramedics, but he couldn't be revived. The stabbing spree sent shockwaves across national and international media, particularly since Australia wasn't known for having a frequency of mass killings. The authorities determined that the stabbing rampage was connected to Couchi's mental health and not an extremist attack, as it had initially been falsely reported on social media. Officer Shanique Varlak from the New York Police Department was bashed in the head with a bottle and pummeled in an unprovoked attack in the Bronx. Varlak was standing in front of the all-car service on 231st Street in the afternoon of April the 17th of 2023. She and other officers had been conducting inspections of illegal smoke shops in the area when 45-year-old Jose Garcia suddenly pulled a bottle out of his pocket and used it to strike Varlak in the back of her head. Garcia then took the attack even further, grabbing the victim's hair and delivering a few roundhouse punches to her face and body. The other officers wrestled with him until they subdued him. The victim was later taken to St. Barnabas Hospital, where she received medical treatment and was listed in stable condition. After being taken into custody, Garcia told the police that God told him to do it. He was arraigned on charges of attempted aggravated assault on a police officer, second and third degree assault, and criminal possession of a weapon. His bail was set at $30,000. Following the incident, Garcia's father told the New York Post that his son had to be taken to a psychiatrist and kept in a safe place. He also said that his son had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder and schizophrenia, which might have prompted the attack. In a judicial hearing held days later, Garcia was ordered to be held at a psychiatric care facility on Rikers Island. Number 11. Christopher Hill. On August the 17th of 2020, 30-year-old Englishman Christopher Hill was sentenced to 10 months behind bars after he bit a police officer during the coronavirus lockdown. Hill, from Waterfoot, Lancashire, had visited his partner in Rochdale, Manchester on April the 9th of 2020. 3 officers spotted the man on Drake Street and attempted to explain to him that in line with government guidelines, he shouldn't be visiting other people's homes. While the officers were lecturing him and seemingly out of nowhere, Hill started attacking them and bit one of them, leaving teeth marks on her arm. The unnamed officer was taken to a nearby hospital but discharged soon after. Following the attack, the chief constable stated that the incident was the lowest of the low, especially during the pandemic. In the end, Hill admitted assault occasioning actual bodily harm, 2 counts of assaulting an officer, and criminal damage. Number 10. Winston Tate. A female Connecticut police officer fought for her life when she was ferociously attacked with a hammer by Winston Tate, aged 52. Tate was an Army veteran who'd been honorably discharged with a medical condition after serving in the Gulf War. He had previously been accused of assaulting 2 other officers amid a lengthy criminal record which included 14 prior convictions within the first half of 2023 alone. Officers had been sent to his home a couple of times already on Liberty Street, Middleton, for what law enforcement called a pattern of terrorizing his neighbors. During these instances, he smashed glass and shouted racial epithets. On August the 12th, Detective Carly Travis responded to Tate's neighborhood on reports of noise and glass breaking in the area. Travis's body cam footage showed the man emerging from his home and walking towards the detective with a hammer. She calmly asked him to drop it, but Tate broke into a run and hit the detective 4 times. During the harrowing attack, Travis was heard screaming, "Stop," before she was able to shoot him in self-defense. The suspect fled back inside his home. More officers arrived at the scene, surrounded the house, and arrested Tate. He and his victim were taken to a hospital where they were treated for relatively minor injuries. In the aftermath, Tate was facing several charges, including criminal attempt to commit assault and interfering with police. Local Middleton Police Union President Nick Puoro said that the man had proven that he wasn't a functioning member of society. Puoro added that he deserved to be locked up in a cage like the animal he is. As of the latest updates, Tate was held behind bars on a $500,000 bond. Number 9. John Pugnia. "I'm going to kill you," yelled Ohio man John Pugnia while violently attacking a police officer on August the 18th of 2019. A witness had previously called authorities reporting a vehicle which was driven erratically by a seemingly intoxicated driver. The witness provided the license plate number, which was registered to Pugnia's wife. North Royalton Patrol Officer Alexandra Bell went to Pugnia's residence on Lynn Drive to investigate. Bell found Pugnia, who'd just arrived in his driveway, and started questioning him. When she asked him why he was acting impaired and if he'd been drinking, the man became agitated. The officer then attempted to arrest him, but he punched her right in the face, causing her to fall to the ground. Pugnia, who outweighed Bell by nearly 100 pounds, got on top of her and continued the onslaught, punching her face several times. He yelled profanities, and that was when his wife rushed out of their house and tried to intervene. As the struggle continued, the suspect had both hands gripping the officer's face, pushing into her eyes so hard that she temporarily lost her vision. Bell was eventually able to pull away from him. Other officers arrived at the scene and took Pugnia into custody. They took him to the North Royalton City Jail, where he became more belligerent. The man lashed out and threatened officers, so they put him in a restraint chair and placed a spit mask over his face. The victim was transported to Southwest General Hospital for treatment. Pugnia was initially charged with attempted murder, among other charges. On June the 12th of 2020, he was handed a 4 to 6 year prison sentence with 5 years of post-release control after he pleaded guilty to felonious assault on a peace officer and 3 counts of aggravated menacing. Number 8. Brian Harmon. 57-year-old Brit Brian Harmon caused 3 fractures to the eye socket of a special constable after a pub brawl. The incident took place at the Crown in Burntwood, England, on January the 31st of 2020. Court records indicated that CCTV footage in the pub showed Harmon becoming irritated at a verbal interaction between his friend and Special Constable Luke Martin, who was off duty at the time. Harmon stood up and punched Martin in the face without warning. The former grabbed a pool cue but was disarmed twice by someone trying to de-escalate the situation. However, Harmon picked up the pool cue a 3rd time and used the thick end of it to inflict serious injuries on Martin, who wasn't showing any aggression himself. According to a witness, the impact on Martin's face sounded like a branch being snapped. The 31-year-old had to be rushed to Walsall Manor Hospital. He would later lose his career in law enforcement after suffering from seizures and limited vision. Harmon was arrested along with 2 others who were suspected of having been involved in the incident. The 2 unnamed men were later handed suspended prison sentences after admitting a fray. Harmon was found guilty of possession of an offensive weapon and inflicting grievous bodily harm. During his sentencing hearing, Harmon's lawyer claimed that he needed intensive and long-term treatment for serious medical conditions he'd incurred after serving in the army. The judge said that Harmon deserved jail time, but concluded that it was appropriate to suspend it given his medical situation. In the end, Harmon was only required to complete 28 days of a rehabilitation activity, a thinking skills program, and adhered to a 3-month curfew, along with a 2-year suspended sentence. Additionally, he was ordered to pay an estimated $2,700 in compensation to the victim. Number 7. Edwin Rivera and Sean Rivera. An off-duty police officer who clashed with 2 brothers during a road rage incident in Queens, New York, accidentally shot himself during the struggle. The incident occurred shortly before 1 p.m. on August the 30th of 2023. 27-year-old officer Christopher Campos was driving his personal vehicle on the Queens Boulevard service road when he came upon a white minivan blocking the roadway. Campos exchanged words with the minivan driver, 32-year-old Edwin Rivera. Campos eventually got around the minivan and continued on near 70th Street, where the 2 vehicles met up again. At that point, Campos and Edwin Rivera continued their verbal altercation, during which Edwin's brother Sean came up behind Campos's Kia Soul and smashed its back window with his hand. Subsequently, Campos wanted to arrest the 27-year-old. Edwin intervened, and Campos drew his gun, identifying himself as an officer from the New York Police Department. A cell phone video captured the moment the officer told the brothers to get on the ground. Apparently, the pair didn't believe him and asked him where his badge was. The situation escalated further and the 3 men got into a physical altercation. Campos was pinned to the ground while Sean was choking him. Suddenly, the officer fired a shot that wounded himself in the leg and struck Edwin's hand. In the end, the trio were hospitalized with various injuries. Ultimately, the Riveras were charged with first-degree assault, assault on a police officer, strangulation, and criminal possession of a weapon. Subsequent information indicated that both men were jailed pending court hearings. Number 6. A face mask row. A police officer was punched in the face while arresting an Englishman over a face mask row on board a train at Acton Town Underground Station in London. The shocking incident, which unfolded on July the 6th of 2021, was caught on video. The 26-year-old passenger had been spoken to by the officer in relation to not wearing a mask on the tube train, which was a violation of COVID regulations at the time. The man, who wasn't identified, became belligerent and refused to put on a mask. Consequently, the officer tried to place handcuffs on him, but he resisted. The man punched the officer in the face and shouted, "Don't touch me!" In the video, the officer could be seen pulling out his baton and telling the man to surrender so that he could cuff him. The officer pleaded with the man several times and told him to get on the floor and spread his arms out so that he could cuff him safely, but the man continued to refuse. Finally, the police officer took hold of the man's arm and successfully restrained him. The officer proceeded to read him his rights, during which the enraged man told him, "You're finished. That's assault." The man was arrested on suspicion of assaulting a cop and taken to a West London police station. The police officer was taken to the hospital for treatment for a minor facial injury and was later discharged. According to a spokesperson for the Metropolitan Police, the force's Directorate of Professional Standards investigated and reviewed the footage. It was determined that the officer involved hadn't committed any misconduct. Number 5. Aaron Heather. On March the 18th of 2019, Australian man Aaron Heather, who was being held at a police station in Wyong, New South Wales, attacked a custody sergeant after she tried to give him a cup of tea. The 41-year-old had just lost his best friend and had stopped taking his medication before turning to cannabis, cocaine and crystal methamphetamine. The night before his arrest, Heather had reportedly been saying bizarre things to his wife and decided to eat 3 grams of crystal meth he had left, causing him to hallucinate about the devil chasing him. The next day, Heather was accused of an assault that took place at a home in Halekulani and was picked up by the cops. He told arresting officers that police were demonic people who lived in the underworld. After Heather was placed behind bars, Custody Sergeant Rachel Robbins brought him a cup of tea and went into the cells to give it to him. Heather suddenly grabbed Robbins by the hair and kneed her 4 times in the head. He also punched her twice in the face before fleeing the custody area. The onslaught left Robbins with a broken nose and cuts to her face and needing to be hospitalized. Heather was eventually detained by other officers. The man later pleaded guilty to causing grievous bodily harm to an officer, assaulted an officer, and resisting arrest in connection with the incident. In the aftermath, he also admitted to a whole bunch of other unrelated charges, including stalking, willful and obscene exposure, common assault, negligent driving, animal cruelty, trespassing, and breaking and entering. In February of 2021, he was sentenced to 8 years behind bars with parole eligibility after serving 4 years. Number 4. Petra Clyde. On August the 22nd of 2020, a police constable from the Greater Manchester Police was bitten by 40-year-old Englishwoman Petra Clyde. Clyde and her twin sister had been drinking heavily and were also under the influence of the synthetic cannabinoid spice. Manchester police were helping marshal protesters in the city centre at around 5:30 p.m. when a member of the public approached the officers and reported an ensuing physical altercation between the sisters and another female. 2 responding officers saw the victim lying on the floor being punched repeatedly by the suspects. They intervened and attempted to restrain Clyde, but she resisted and struck one of the officers, Jane Donlan. Donlan got her handcuffs out and tried to place Clyde under arrest, but was punched again by the woman. Clyde then tried to kick the officer before succeeded in biting her forearm for a couple of seconds, causing bleeding bite marks. Shocked passerby Lynn Fogarty saw the attack unfold and stepped in. She helped restrain Clyde while the officer broke free. Fogarty said that she was worried that Donlan was going to be hurt further and that other people were just screaming and cheering without helping at all. Fogarty further claimed that Clyde's mouth was foaming and that she looked like she was on drugs. The bite caused Donlan to suffer skin loss and a high risk of infection. She needed to have a hepatitis B booster and a tetanus vaccine, as well as antibiotics. Clyde later claimed that the bite wasn't intentional and denied being intoxicated or on any form of drugs during the incident. Clyde was later sentenced to 2 years after admitting to causing actual bodily harm. Number 3. Temasan Ort Jafor. Body cam footage captured the moment 41-year-old Englishman Temasan Ort Jafor spat blood in a female police officer's eye as he was being arrested. West Midlands police were called to the Vincent Wiles house in Coventry on April the 18th of 2020 after Ort Jafor had become abusive towards his neighbor. When they arrived, Ort Jafor had already suffered a bloody nose. While they tried to arrest the man, he became aggressive, so one of the officers took him to the floor, while Police Constable Annie Napier placed handcuffs on him. The footage showed that as they were getting Ort Jafor up, he spat into Napier's face and it caught her straight in the eye. Consequently, the other officer got the man in a headlock and wrestled him back to the floor. While Napier's colleagues were comforting her, she told them, "I'm just worried about the coronavirus." Following the incident, she tested negative for COVID-19 and remained on active duty. Because Ort Jafor was on bail at the time for a previous incident, he was remanded in custody. More than a week later, Ort Jafor, who suffered from schizophrenia and was bipolar, admitted common assault and 2 charges of common assault on emergency workers at Warwick Crown Court. On July the 2nd of 2020, he was sentenced to 8 months behind bars and ordered to pay nearly $200 as a victim surcharge. Number 2. Mary Clifton. An Arizona woman was arrested after she evaded a traffic stop, crashed her truck into a fence, and encouraged her pit bull to attack police officers. The incident unfolded at around 10:30 p.m. On August the 5th of 2023, police had been driving near 107th Avenue and Coulter Street in Phoenix when they spotted a pickup truck in the middle of the roadway obstructing traffic. They subsequently used their lights and sirens to alert her and to execute a traffic stop. The driver, later identified as 39-year-old Mary Clifton, drove off before losing control of her vehicle and crashing into the fence of a home in the area. As officers moved in to detain Clifton, she went from the driver's side seat to the passenger seat to exit the truck and pulled out a 90-pound pit bull. The officers tried to get her on the ground, but the woman resisted, instead unleashing the dog on them. Court documents indicated one of the officers was bit in the left hand, causing a minor abrasion. The officer then hit the dog twice, causing it to briefly go away. Upon returning, it tried to bite the same officer, but the dog was tased. In an effort to knock the taser off of the officer's hands, Clifton swatted at the taser, causing it to activate and shock the dog again. As the officers continued their attempts to detain Clifton, the dog bit the other officer on the right foot, clamping on for a few seconds before running away. In the end, Clifton was booked into the Maryvale station on charges of unlawful flight from law enforcement, aggravated assault against a police officer, and resisting arrest. It is not clear what happened to the dog. Number 1. Jordana Capello. On February the 14th of 2019, police in Franklin Borough, New Jersey, received reports of a car that was driving erratically on Route 23. Responding officer Nicholas Della Fera found the vehicle at a nearby bar and restaurant called the Irish Cottage Inn. Della Fera found the driver, 26-year-old Jordana Capello, arguing with her mother in the bar's lobby. The woman was apparently intoxicated. Police said that when the officer approached Capello, she began acting disorderly, shouting profanities at him. At that point, Della Fera tried to arrest Capello. In an attempt to resist, she flailed her arms and bit the officer in the shoulder. She even reportedly threatened him, claiming to be a member of a gang. It didn't keep her from getting arrested, after which Della Fera received medical treatment at Newton Medical Center for the bruising he'd sustained. Capello was charged with aggravated assault on a police officer, resisting arrest, and disorderly conduct. That wasn't the end of it. In the aftermath, Capello harassed Della Fera and sent him several messages. In November of 2019, she was charged with harassment, but she still continued to message the officer. A complaint warrant was ultimately obtained due to the fact that Capello was on pre-trial release. She was arrested in January of 2020. Records indicate that 3 months later she was sentenced to 1-year probation after pleading guilty to resisting arrest and disorderly conduct. Capello was also required to undergo a mental health evaluation. Her probation was later extended for another year after she violated the terms. Thanks for watching. Would you rather drive the world's fastest production car for a day or ride inside of a fighter jet as it broke the sound barrier? Let us know in the comments section below.